Hey, Mark, it's tradition. It's the pregame of our podcast. What did you find interesting or give me some feedback on how the podcast went for you?
You know what, this was a really fun one to talk about because it's something that everybody always talks about, and I think we kind of got into some of the nuts and bolts on both sides of it. The most interesting thing to me, though, is the most important thing about the podcast is after what I say is the most important thing. So you got to make sure you
Oh,
watch all
yeah.
the way through it to find out
Yeah.
what really is most important.
Right. And then for me, it is realizing that you brought up some things that I really had no concept of. Like I didn't put it together at all. And I'm humble enough, Mark, to say I don't know it all. I don't know it all. So
Wow.
thank you for sharing in the podcast with me, sir, and getting me educated. All
Yeah.
right, ladies and gentlemen, it's off to the podcast. Stand by.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to SoCo's Most Interesting Podcast. I am your host, Mark Ditkof, with my amazing and well-relaxed co-host, Chris Bongirno. Chris, what are we doing today?
You know, Mark, I am super chilling. I just got done with my every other week massage. I got a shout out to Chris Altrogi. Anvil Bodyworks has put me in the right place. Well, with my help, I helped him by
Well,
being there.
stay awake through this one for me if you
I
don't
will.
mind.
Actually, it brought me a lot of clarity. So I'm looking forward to a good podcast today, my friend.
Awesome. What are we talking about?
You know, we were thinking about, is it pros and cons of renting or pros and cons of buying? And what I think we've kind of come to the conclusion is that a pro for one is maybe a con for the other. So, take it for whatever you want to call it today. So either the pros and cons of renting or the pros and cons of buying or all of it. So where do you want to start today, Mark? What we start, pros or cons? You feeling positive or negative?
Do you know what I like to do is I like to talk about the pros of renting because I feel like so many people are in our industry constantly just down the idea of renting, right? How dare you rent a home? It's all these bad things, and we'll talk about those. But I think there's a lot of pros to it for the right people. And so let's start off on the positive note. Let's say, okay, maybe I'm a renter. Why is that a good thing? In what circumstances am I doing the right thing for myself and my lifestyle if I'm a renter?
You know, the thing that comes to mind for me is, and I don't mean this is in a bad way, but the lack of responsibility. That you may have a lifestyle or a mental situation where you just really want to make a payment every month, rent payment, and you don't want to deal with what happens if, you sit on the toilet and it pulls off from the wall and now you've got a water leak and a broken toilet. To be honest with you, when I was younger and I rented an apartment, that was a big thing for me. I didn't want the responsibility of home ownership, regardless of anything else. I was young and didn't have a lot of resources, and I didn't have a lot of time. How about for you, Mark?
Yeah, I think that just in general, all those upkeep items, especially the big ticket ones, are huge pros for renters, right? Furnace breaks, air conditioner goes out, water heater goes out, the appliances stop working, the roof leaks, all
Right.
those big things are ones that when you're the homeowner, it's your responsibility to fix those, right? Nobody's coming. There's no landlord to call, right? You are the landlord when you own the home. And so as a renter, if that's something that you just say, look, I get all the other things, but I'm just not interested in having to worry about that. I think it's a huge pro for renting.
Yeah, and I think it's both, like kind of what I mentioned. I think it's economical, like what you talked about with, if something big blows out, if you lose your heat and you live in Colorado like we both do, it goes beyond just, hey, I'm going to throw on a jacket and I'll be okay. Who cares? The home will be warm enough even without heat, but then your pipes are going to burst. Like then you've got another problem. So it's economical on that aspect of it. But on the other hand, like I said, it's mental, taking on that responsibility for a roof. If you're a renter and we have a hailstorm and you get your car, fixed and you had $1,000 comprehensive deductible, you might have a $2,500 deductible on your roof. And so all those little things start to add up. So I think that's a big pro for renting for a lot of people. It certainly was for me when I was first starting out being a young adult.
Yeah.
What's
Another
what's something
pro,
else, Mark,
I
that's a pro for you?
I think another pro for renting is when I encourage people to rent. A lot of times, if I have friends or people that I know that are either new to our city or going to a new city and they want me to help them find like a real estate agent in that city to help them buy, I say, absolutely. But I would encourage, if you haven't spent a lot of time in a city where you're going to be putting down roots, rent for a little while, right? Find out where in that city do you like to spend time? Where in that city do you feel comfortable and safe? Where in that city has the schools that your family is going to need, or the, whatever other things that you do. You might not know that right away. And somebody's advice for you, hey, this is a good area, you should go there, might not be where you end up wanting to be. And so moving to a new place and renting for a year or two, I think is a huge pro. Just because you get the opportunity to get the lay of the land before you make the commitment to buy a house.
Yeah, and I think that goes hand in hand in another pro for renting, and that's kind of like what you just mentioned, a commitment. Because buying a home is a commitment. And if you buy in a place you're not comfortable, if you buy in a place where you don't feel safe, all of those kind of things, and you want to get out of there, there's some things that go along with that. It's not simply giving 30 days notice to your landlord and finding another place to live, which you have that opportunity in a lot of cases with renting. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think from my perspective, people, even in cities that they're familiar with, you look at a city differently when you're living in the neighborhood versus driving through the neighborhood. And I've lived in different parts of our community, and really they've all turned out to be different than what I expected when I ended up living there. None of them were exactly how I thought they'd be. In fact, one of them, a neighborhood that I thought was going to be extremely peaceful, ended up being the loudest and busiest neighborhood that I've ever lived in my life. So, and that was completely surprising. I never expected that.
Right. And if you had bought that house in that neighborhood, now you're stuck with it. What do I do? Right. Another
Yeah,
pro with renting is just, if huge life circumstances change, you lose your job, you lose a spouse, you lose whatever that is, right? If you own the home, it's not easy to get out from under it, right? What if you don't have
sure.
enough equity to sell and now you're going into foreclosure? If you're renting, okay, like, even if you do just break your lease and just disappear, I mean, yeah, they can come after you, but it's not likely that it's going to really be disastrous. And so there's a lot of pros to renting, and it's something that, again, I feel like a lot of people in our industry just can't ever say anything good about it because they don't make money off of it. And so
Sure.
they just say you can't do that because that's not good for you. And there's really circumstances where renting is the right option, right? No strings attached. We talked about that a little bit, right? If I'm renting and tomorrow I wake up and go, do you know what? I really want to live in North Carolina. Well, I could start making that happen really quickly. Probably within the
Sure.
next month or so, I could be living in North Carolina. Where if I
Right.
own a home here, it's not as simple, right? It's not
Yeah.
as easy just to get up and go.
And one of the cons that I think is important to talk about that kind of goes hand in hand with that, Mark, is eviction. If you're renting, to kind of switch gears here a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
is that, an eviction doesn't have to be a hostile situation where you're not making a rent payment and they're kicking you out because you're a deadbeat, right? It can be because your landlord's circumstances have changed and they need that to be their primary residence. Well, you're going to be out. And that's the same thing that could happen if they're not making the rent payment or if they decide to sell the home. So, from a con standpoint, it can put you in a lot more precarious situation in terms of having to change your life based on someone else's situation. Does that make sense?
It does. So let's do exactly what you just did, and let's switch now because we've talked about the pros of renting, and I think that's a pretty good list. There might be some other pros that we didn't talk about, but overall, that got the idea of it, right? The lack of responsibility towards the property is the biggest pro for renting, right? And so when we switch to cons, like you had just said, you're not in control, right? And so if I own a home as a rental property, somebody's renting it, I could at any point within legal boundaries of the lease say, look, you're a month to month tenant. I want to move in, or I don't want to renew with you, or I want to sell the property. You have 30 days to get out, or you have 60 days to get out. And you could have been living there for 20 years, right?
Right.
And now this is your home
Right.
at that point. But now they're saying, no, it's not your home because you never bought it. You need to get out. And that can be really troublesome, especially in a market where it's hard to find good places to live. When you think you have somewhere good, it's not guaranteed, even if you're making those payments consistently and on time.
Yeah. And on the lending side, I've run into that where clients have come and said, you got to get me into a house in 45 days. I'm going to be homeless because I've been evicted because of, one of the things. I think it's more common than people probably think. I still think it's probably rare, but I think it's more common. I've seen it a lot in my career, and it's really disheartening to see families, especially young families, in that situation where, I literally had customers that were going to have to be out of their house at the end of December, and they were in the middle of, having to try to find a place to live during the holidays, and that housing insecurity was very stressful on that family. We did get them in before the end of the year, but it was very emotional to go through that. So as a renter, you take on, you don't have the responsibility of repairing the air conditioner, but you also give up that control of, somebody else's whim of getting you out of your home.
Yeah. So what's another con of renting then? Why should somebody buy a house instead of rent a house if that's the way we're going now?
Well, I'm not going to go to the big one yet. I'm going to talk about one more, and that's payment shock. That is, your lease comes due, or your 1 year is up, and you've been paying $1,200 a month or $1,500 a month, and the rental market has just shot up. And guess what? That's what we've been facing here the last couple of years. And now your monthly payment goes from $1,500 a month to $2,000 or $2,100 a month. And there doesn't, whatever's in your lease that you signed may or may not have provisions for what happens with that. And if it converts to a month to month after that, they can set it to whatever they want to within reason, correct?
Yeah, and they can do it if you're month to month, they could literally raise your rent at any time, right? And so that's why a lot of
Right.
people that do rent want lengthy lease agreements because it locks them in. And sometimes there's that payment shock, and it's not because the landlord's just a jerk, right? I mean, this last year, taxes went up, insurance
Sure.
went up. You've been there for a few years, and it's always creeping up. And now all of a sudden, the landlord goes, I'm not making any money on this house. I'm not covering the bills on it or whatever it is. So they have to raise it, right? We've had tenants in some of our rentals for years, and they're phenomenal. But I do know for a fact, like, eventually I'm going to have to raise their rent. I can't keep them where they are forever because I won't be able to afford the house while they live in it if I don't. Now, we're going to always do that within reason and with a lot of good notice because that's the way we operate our business. But I know some landlords, they don't do that, right? They see an
Right.
opportunity to raise and they just do it. And so if you're a renter, that's something that's going to happen to you at some point because it's a business. They try and make it not personal. That's why a lot of them put property managers in place or safeguards in between themselves and the renter. And that allows them to be a little bit more cynical and a little bit more business minded when they make these decisions.
Sure, absolutely. And that's an important thing to realize as a renter. Just a quick story. I had rented a place for a while from someone that I had a relationship with as a friend, and their financial situation changed. And so my financial situation changed. And it literally changed in 30 days. I was paying rent of one amount, and starting the next month, I was paying a different amount. And really, it didn't have anything to do, like you said, with them being a jerk or anything else. And I had a great relationship with this person prior to renting. Finances changed for them, and they had to make a business decision, no fault of their own. Obviously, I wasn't happy, but, it didn't wreck our friendship at all.
Yeah. But
So,
that's something you got as a renter, right? You say, look, either pay it or leave, right? Go find somewhere else to
right.
live. And so that's the decision you have to make then.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what's the big one, Mark? What's the great benefit of buying your own home versus paying rent to a
Right.
landlord?
Yeah, and it's all about the money, right? And so that's the one thing that a lot of people always push is that you need to buy, you need to buy, you need to buy because you build wealth through real estate, which includes your own real estate, what you live in. It's not just rental properties or, mountain cabins that you Airbnb, things like that. What about your little 2-bed, 1-bath house that's very affordable that you bought and you've lived in for years, right? That is an asset that builds your wealth. And so it's actually kind of neat that they actually put out a stat. I think NAR or it's all over the internet. You can look it up. Is the average net worth of a renter is just over $6,000. That's total. If you take all of their assets minus all their liabilities, it comes in about $6,000 total, right? The average net worth of a homeowner is $225,000. That is an insane difference. It's like 40 times difference
Yeah, it's
in
staggering.
just owning a home. And a lot of the times, at least when we work with first time home buyers, Chris, a lot of the times they end up paying a mortgage payment very comparable to what they were paying in rent.
Yeah.
It's just now they're paying into their own pocket instead of their landlord's pocket, right? So whether or not their landlord has a mortgage on it, actually, a lot of times the phrase is, right, whose mortgage are you paying? You're always paying a mortgage. Is it yours or is it the landlord's? And I always joke that, well, a pro to renting is you get that good feeling in your soul that you're helping your landlord build
Good
wealth.
karma. Good
Yeah,
karma,
such
man.
good
That's all
karma. But
karma.
do you know whose karma is even better is when you help yourself build that wealth. And it's
And your
literally a lot of times
family.
it's the same payment or it's within range. I know one person I had, they actually came to potentially rent one of the houses we had for rent. And I was talking to him and I think we were charging like $1,200 a month or whatever. And we checked his credit and he had credit viable enough to buy a house. I said, have you ever considered buying a house? And he said, well, no, I thought I could only rent. I said, so for $1,200, I'm going to charge you here. That is pretty comparable to buying about a $200,000 house at the time. This is a few years ago when interest rates were lower.
Right.
And I said, would you be interested in seeing if that's an option for you? Because I got to tell you, the house you're about to rent for $1,200 a month is not worth $200,000, right? You're going to buy a much better house and have the same payment than what you're about to pay me every single month. And so we did. We went and we bought a house and you got this phenomenal, like 3-bed, 1-bath with solar on it and a garage. I mean, it was a really nice little house and he didn't even know it was an option. But that's the thing is that it was literally the same payment. I think his payment when he bought ended up being like $1,180. So it's actually
Yeah.
a little bit cheaper. And now he does now have more responsibilities, right? If the furnace breaks, it's on him and not me. But he was ready for that. And so it's just interesting that you can build so much more wealth so much faster if you own your asset instead of renting the house and paying your landlords, giving your landlord more of your wealth.
And Mark, I want to talk about that word wealth just real quickly and kind of put some context behind it. I was talking with a real estate agent earlier this week about the subject of wealth, and that for most renters, myself included when I was a renter, is that word wealth isn't real to me and was hard for me to think of because only rich people are wealthy or only rich people have wealth. And it wasn't real. It wasn't tangible. Like wealth sounded like paper money. Does that make sense? Like I had no emotion tied to that, and it didn't seem real to me. Like I could build wealth. As in my early 20s, and someone would say, "Hey, build wealth, plan for retirement, do all this stuff," and I'm like, you know what? I just want to go out Friday night. I'm not wealth. What are you talking about? So what I want to talk about, and why I want to bring this up, is because what you're really building is savings. It's not liquid savings. It's not money in a savings account, but the wealth that we're talking about is to make it real, to make it conscious. You need to think of it like a long-term savings account because part of that, what we have a hard time doing, I think, as consumers, is that we look at a bank statement and it says how much money we have in the bank and we can go take that out and that's real and that's tangible, right? Still just paper. I don't see the money, but that's it's not real. But with wealth, when your home goes in value from $250,000 to $300,000, you don't get a statement for that. I don't see a statement that says I made $50,000 in the last 2 years on that home, right? So what I want people to think about is when we're talking about the pro of home ownership gives you the opportunity to increase wealth and increase your wealth substantially in a much shorter period of time. than if you were just simply trying to put money in a checking or a savings account every month. We're talking about similar to a savings account, a long-term savings account, an asset that grows in value. And you may not even ever have to add to that asset. Once you buy that home, over time, it's going to increase in value. You don't have to keep making a deposit every month. Although you are, every time you make that mortgage payment, that principal balance that you owe money on goes down.
Well, and that's what I was actually going to say is it's a forced savings account as well, right? Because they require you feed it a little bit every month in regards to paying that principal balance down. So even if the house doesn't appreciate, right, it doesn't go up in value. Say we have a market where we stay stagnant for a few years or potentially even go down in value. That principal balance getting paid down, though, is forcing that savings as well to keep you above water. And so at the beginning, we all know it doesn't add a lot of principal payments on it, right? But as it gets towards the backside of the loan, big chunks of it are going into this forced savings account that when you sell the house, that's just more money that's going into your pocket.
Yeah. And I, it's kind of a little off topic talking about wealth in this context, but because it's such an important part of the con of renting and the pro of home ownership is building that wealth quickly, you need to have some emotion to it and really embrace that as something. There's really, unless you're buying like a collectible sports car that's going to go up in value, the car that you drive around every day is going down. It's an asset, but it's a depreciating asset. A home, which you live in, it's got two benefits. It provides shelter for you and your family, and it's going up in value. People are going to want that, and they're willing to pay more for it in the future than what you bought it for yesterday. And that is that emotion that can go along with that, and try to make it real for yourself and see that as a real benefit. I think it gets lost and people just associate. I know I did when I was younger. It was just a place to live. There wasn't this big difference between a rent payment and a mortgage payment. Like you said that, for your customer, they were kind of the same amount. And man, if I buy a house, I'm going to, if there is a hailstorm, I have to replace the roof and those kind of things. But really that asset is going to go up in value over time.
Yeah, and so we haven't talked about the biggest con to renting. I know you said let's talk about the big one, and I said something, but that wasn't the biggest one. There's one that is by far and away the most important aspect that is a con to renting.
Go.
You can't choose what pets you have.
Oh, yeah.
Right? When you're renting a home, the landlord can tell you, yes, you can have a pet. No, you can't have a pet. Yes, you can have specific types of dogs this size, no cats, birds, whatever. If you own a home and you want to have a zoo inside that home, I mean, depending on your zoning codes, I suppose, you got to do whatever you want, right? I mean, if you want to have 13 lizards, have 13 lizards. Do whatever you want to do. So I actually have a friend of mine that he had what I would consider a zoo inside of his house for a long time. And that included everything from rabbits and rats to fish and turtles to big dogs and little dogs and cats. And you're renting. It's going to be hard to convince your landlord to let you have a house like that. So.
Yeah, I mean, and even if you're willing to put up pet deposits, there are landlords that there isn't a pet deposit large enough to allow you to bring in, pets. And the other thing is personalization. If you have a particular style that you want to bring to your sanctuary where you live, there may be restrictions of what paint colors you can use, and
what walls you can knock down, and how you want to redo your kitchen so it's more functional for the way you cook and all that, right? I'm a landlord. I would never allow my tenants to do those kind of things, right?
Yeah,
because
and
that's just going to destroy my house in the long run.
Even carpeting, you may dislike what's there and be like, hey, landlord, I'll tell you what, I'll put in new carpeting. One, do you really want to put in carpeting for your landlord and not, get any real benefit from it? But then also the landlord's going to be like, no, I don't want to replace that, because then I've got to replace it if you move out, because nobody likes red carpet anymore.
Well, and we're even really hesitant on allowing them to paint. It's not that I think they're going to do a bad job at painting. It's not that hard to do a decent job, but it's, how many coats, they paint. That means I'm repainting it when they move out for sure.
Right.
And now anybody, a lot of times we end up repainting when they move out, but that's just one coat. But if they've painted and now I'm painting over that, that's 2 coats now. And so it's really one of those, like, how much paint do you want on these walls? How small do you want your house to get with all the paint that's on the walls? A lot of times we just say it's just easier if you don't.
Well, and just a quick side note, I have a friend who's a landlord, and they allow pretty much anything within reason in terms of paint colors, but you have to use one of their 3 professional painters to do it.
Oh, so you can't do it yourself.
You cannot do it yourself.
And most tenants aren't going to want to do it themselves, right? They're not going to pay somebody else to do it, right?
And that's the downside, right? And that's one of the cons of the renting. In this particular case, again, you're at the whims of the landlord. Sure, you can repaint it whatever you want, but you've got to pick one of our 3 painters and pay them, whatever the quote's going to be. Because they want to make sure that it's a good quality paint job, and they're going to go back when you move out and hire these guys to paint over it, I would assume. And that's part of the reason why they do it. And there's not paint on a carpet and, those kinds of things. So, I think when we brought this subject up, Mark, I was kind of, you were kind of like pros for renting. And I'm like, I hadn't given it a whole bunch of thought, but I was like, what's the pro of renting? I'm not getting it. And you really made me think about that as a long-term viable option for some, a short-term viable option for probably more than what I would have thought. And I think you had some really good points. I appreciate you to bringing that to me, because that's something that I can talk with my kids about too, that, being in the industry, I'm always like, buy. You got to buy right away. And here's why, and build wealth and don't waste time. But you made some really strong points of why, when they're ready to be out on their own, why they need to consider renting for a period of time.
Yeah, I just think it's worth talking about, just because I feel like the conversations are one-sided so often, at least where we are, just because, again, we're in the middle of it all, and people in our industry make money off of people buying houses. And so to be a little bit more pragmatic about it and just really have an honest conversation, which is what I typically like to do, just say, look, it's not like it's a one-size-fits-all situation, right? Some people really should rent. Some people should rent long-term, and there's going to be specific instances for that. Now, the majority of people are going to benefit from buying a home at some point, right?
Sure.
And once they know where they're going to land in the area they want to be and can find something that's a comfortable price, they want to lock in that interest rate, they want to lock in that monthly payment in an area and all those things, and then do whatever they want with the house. That is really the best thing, right? Build your wealth that way. But it's not always the right decision, and it's not always the right decision right now. And so that's just kind of why I want to talk about this today.
Mark, if somebody wants to sit down with you or talk over the phone or have a online chat with you and so forth, where do people reach you, sir?
So you can find me on any of the major social media platforms through at Onyx Home Group. That's Onyx with a Y, Onyx Home Group. And we respond really, really fast to all the people that reach out. And
Are you on X? Are you on X?
Am I on X? Yes,
yeah.
Always.
Formerly Twitter? Formerly Twitter.
Oh, no. I'm not on X. I'm on X now.
So just to clarify, you are not on all major social media, because
is anyone on that one?
I don't know.
I don't know if anybody uses it. I'm also not on Threads, but I think that goes through Facebook.
I just wanted to ask you to see whether you actually would put together what X was. You're like, oh yeah, sure, I'm on X. Yeah. Not ecstasy.
I think I am on Twitter, but I won't respond to that one.
Okay.
And then don't forget, guys, like and subscribe our podcast, post in the comments, do all that kind of fun stuff. Chris, if they wanted to reach out to you directly, how are they going to do that?
They just give you a call, Mark, and then you put them in touch with me.
That's right.
With the spelling of my last name and everything, the best way to get a hold of me is look in the comments on YouTube, and it's got all my contact information there.
Sweet.
Mark, as always, man, I got something out of this personally, which is why I think we both wanted to do this. I hope our audience finds the information here at least interesting, and hopefully it spurred some thoughts for you and some conversations maybe with you and those who are important to you in your life.
Chris, I just appreciate our time together every single day.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. That's not just, we're not just saying that for the cameras, right? Right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. Ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap on this week's SoCo's Most Interesting podcast. Mark, we'll see you next time, buddy.
See you next time.